So the Ranger is an interesting one. But anyway, we're talking about Dungeons & Dragons 2024. Yes, that's the official title, D&D 2024. Call it 5.5, 6th edition, whatever you want to call it. It's the new Dungeons & Dragons. I'm Brad Wolf, and welcome to Dire Den. In this video, I'm talking about the expert classes, the Bard, the Ranger, and the Rogue for the new version of Dungeons & Dragons. In my last video, I covered the Warrior classes, and I also said I was going to cover the idea of power creep and how the new edition of Dungeons & Dragons is handling that. Throughout the last 10 years, as new subclasses have come out for the game, mainly appearing in Xanathar's Guide to Everything and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, the game has steadily seen those subclasses get more powerful than the subclasses in the original player's handbook. And there's a certain group of players who are concerned about power creep. Me personally, I don't see Dungeons & Dragons as a player versus player game. Therefore, I'm not that concerned about game balance. I largely focus on the fact that the Dungeon Master has a lot of ability to adjust and share spotlight and move things around as they run the game. And for the most part, I think 5th edition is fairly well balanced. But I know there are people, we can call them power gamers. That's not a derogatory term. I have a power gamer in my group, and I personally don't get bothered by him. I don't think power gaming is necessarily a bad thing. But those people who really focus on the nuances and the balance of the game can get bothered by the idea of power creep. So how is the new version of Dungeons & Dragons handling that? All the revised classes that are coming out in the new edition are essentially tuned to the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything power level. So if you look at the subclasses from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, they should line up fairly well with the new subclasses in the new version of the game. Then that raises the question, well, how does that affect backwards compatibility? Because isn't everything supposed to be compatible with the previous edition? Well, here's what they've actually said about backwards compatibility. The idea is that you would replace the Player's Handbook from 2014 with the new 2024 Player's Handbook. Therefore, you should be using the 2024 classes. However, you could go back to Tasha's Cauldron of Everything or maybe Xanathar's Guide and pull out some subclasses, and they would still work. It might take some adjustments, but it shouldn't be that difficult to use a subclass from Xanathar's or Tasha's with the new Player's Handbook. But more importantly, their goal with backwards compatibility is that you can still run the old adventures, that you would still be able to run Tyranny of Dragons, Ghosts of Saltmarsh, Curse of Strahd, any of those old adventures you would be able to still run with the new edition of the game. That's largely what they mean by backwards compatibility. So also be aware that when the new monster comes out, any monsters you would want to pull from the new monster manual. So if an old book said the players encounter a wraith at this point in the adventure, you would pull the wraith from the new monster manual instead of the old adventure book. Now realize when an old adventure says there's a monster in a particular scene, they are referencing a monster from the 2014 monster manual. So moving forward, what you'll do is use the monster from the 2024 monster manual. The goal here is that the new monster manual will be tuned up and the challenge rating system will be improved so that it matches this new level of play, so that the new Player's Handbook will be on that level of play that we saw with Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and the new monster manual will be compatible at that power level. Now, I realize there will be some exceptions because adventure paths often have unique monsters that might not be in the monster manual. But for the most part, the majority of the monsters you'll be using with those old adventures will be coming from the new monster manual. Hopefully that clarifies things. Now, let's take a look at our experts. And our first expert is the Bard. One of the first notable changes, they are only proficient in simple weapons. No longer proficient with swords, rapier, and hand crossbow, like they used to be in 2014. And this makes me feel that the Bard was really supposed to be focused on spell casting, that they are leaning more into a Bard as a spellcaster. Now let's hit the highlights of the Bard abilities. And Bardic Inspiration gets a buff. It now lasts 1 hour instead of 10 minutes and can be used after failed rolls. You no longer have to declare your use of Bardic Inspiration before the DM tells you fail. This not only makes the ability better, it also streamlines gameplay. Next is Font of Inspiration, which allows you to expend a spell slot to use your Bardic Inspiration. And Vicious Mockery gets upgraded to a D6 instead of a D4. That's a really nice boost. And Counter Charm has been upgraded. It's no longer an action, it's now a reaction that gives your ally a reroll versus Charm or Frightened. Then we have the Capstone ability that gives you both Power Word Heal and Power Word Kill. Both of these have been upgraded from the 2014 version, so they're now more effective and make nice spells to always have prepared. These spells aren't that powerful that you would automatically choose them, but as an always prepared option, these are really nice. And of course, it's thematic that the Bard is a master of words. And then the 4 subclasses we're going to get in the new version of D&D are the College of Lore, the College of Valor, which are both upgrades from the 2014 version. Then we get College of Glamour, which is slightly improved over the Xanathar's Guide version. And then the new one, College of Dance. And I think these 4 do a really good job of representing the various facets of a Bard. Lore focuses on storytelling and history. Valor gives you your proficiencies in martial weapons and then focuses on combat. Glamour focuses on trickery. And of course, Dance provides you that acrobatic, nimble Bard. Now, it's important to point out that I don't have any insider knowledge. This is all cobbled together from playtest materials, and some of the documents supersede the previous documents. So the playtest has evolved throughout the design process. So I don't think the Bard is going to be the best spellcaster in the game, the way some people made it sound in response to the early playtest documents. Overall, the Bard is leaning more into a full-on caster class than a jack-of-all-trades class like it was in previous editions. Next up, we have the Ranger, and it's probably the class that I have the least amount of confidence in, but it still comes across overall as serviceable. So let me explain. There's been 2 different versions of the playtest Ranger, and both of them have not been great. In fact, they're not really even good, but they were very distinct from each other, and I'll get back to that in a second. However, Chris from Tree at Monk's Temple, a YouTube channel you might be familiar with, he did a breakdown on the Ranger damage, and the damage output was solid, and it was consistent with the Fighter and the Barbarian. So overall, the Ranger works, but it's still not great. However, I do have confidence that the 2024 Ranger will be better by the time we see it in the Player's Handbook. But before I get to that, let's just talk about the problem with Rangers in general. People just have different opinions about what a Ranger should be. So a lot of people think the Ranger should be an archer, like Robin Hood or Legolas. Whoa, don't attack. I know Legolas is not the Ranger of the group in The Lord of the Rings. That's Aragorn. But when I say people think of a Ranger as an archer, they think of Legolas because he's an archer. That's all I'm saying. I know Strider, Aragorn, is the Ranger of the group in Tolkien's works. Wait, don't come at me. I know some of you are going to say Gary Gygax was not a fan of The Lord of the Rings, and he did not model his Ranger after Strider Aragorn. In fact, the D&D Ranger has always been a spellcaster, and that really paints the Ranger more like the Witcher, being able to use spell-like abilities, or maybe Perrin from Wheel of Time. But remember, Perrin not only had the ability to travel to the dream world, he also had the ability to communicate with wolves. And that brings up the Beastmaster Ranger archetype like Jon Snow. And of course, Drizzt, the most popular Ranger of the Forgotten Realms. In fact, some would argue Drizzt is the icon of D&D. Even though Drizzt has Guinevere, people often describe him as a skirmisher. So again, that's another archetype that the Ranger is supposed to be able to hold up. Whoa, wait. I know some of you really like Drizzt, and there's some of you who really don't like Drizzt. But I think you're starting to see my point here. It's difficult to define the Ranger because the Ranger means different things to different people. But that's the goal of this playtest. When they say they set out to design the most roguiest rogue and the most fightery fighter, then they need to design the most rangery Ranger. But that's hard to do because the Ranger, again, means so many different things to so many different people. So coming back to my original point, why am I still confident that the Ranger is going to be good in the new Player's Handbook? The Ranger appeared in 2 different playtests, playtest number 2 and playtest number 6. The Deft Explorer, Favorite Enemy, and Foe Slayer abilities received really good scores during playtest 2, while playtest 6, the rest of the Ranger abilities scored fairly high. So we'll be getting some sort of merger between these two where the Deft Explorer, Favorite Enemy, and Foe Slayer abilities from playtest 2 will be integrated in with the rest of the Ranger abilities from playtest 6. Therefore, giving us a Ranger that we should be satisfied with based on the playtest feedback scores. So hopefully combining these 2 versions of the Ranger is going to give us a solid one for the 2024 Player's Handbook, but we won't know till September. Fingers crossed. But real quick, let's look at our 2024 Ranger subclasses. We'll have the Beastmaster, the Fey Wanderer, the Gloomstalker, and the Hunter. And I think those do a pretty good job of hitting those Ranger archetypes, those diverse Ranger archetypes we discussed earlier. But the Ranger is still this moving target. Speaking of moving targets, let's take a look at our Rogue. And the Rogue was one of the best classes from 5th edition, so we don't really need a significant upgrade, but they do a good job of giving the Rogue more options, making the class more versatile and interesting to play. So now, like the Fighter, the Barbarian, and the Paladin, the Rogue is going to benefit from weapon mastery. Now, of course, they're not as proficient in as many weapons as the Fighter and the Barbarian, but the weapons they are proficient in will give them access to some of the weapon mastery features. And like I said, the Rogue didn't need a significant upgrade, so the following features are largely unchanged. Sneak Attack, Cunning Action, Uncanny Dodge, Expertise, Evasion, Slippery Mind, and Elusive are mostly the same. However, you now get the Reliable Talent feature at 7th level instead of 11th level. That feels like a significant upgrade to me. And the Steady Aim feature, which was an optional rule from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, is now included in the core rules. But let me spend some time going over the most significant change to the Rogue, and that is the new Cunning Strike feature. And I just cut and pasted it right out of the playtest material. You have developed cunning ways to use your sneak attack. When you deal sneak attack damage, you can add one of the following Cunning Strike effects. Each effect has a die cost, which is a number of sneak attack damage dice you must forego to add the effect. You remove the die before rolling, and the effect occurs immediately after the attack's damage is dealt. For example, if you add the poison effect, remove 1d6 from the sneak attack damage before rolling. Now here are the different effects. You can disarm, trip, or withdraw. But let's take a closer look at the poison effect, which is the example they used in the previous description. You add a toxin to your strike, forcing the target to make a Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, the target has the poison condition for 1 minute. At the end of each of its turns, the poison target can repeat the saving throw, ending the effect on itself on a success. So you're essentially giving up 1d6 damage dice to impose the poison condition. So this is where a tactical decision has to be made. You have to choose, do I want to do more damage, or do I want to impose disadvantage on the target? So now you get some options in combat. You're not just always focused on pounding out the damage. You can do some tactical maneuvering and make the Rogue a little more interesting to play. So you get that ability at 5th level, and then it gets upgraded at 11th level. So now at 11th level, you have 6 sneak attack dice to work with. You can drop 2 of those dice and choose 2 of the Cunning Strike effects, still dealing an extra 46 damage and using 2 effects. Combining effects, for example, you might trip the target and withdraw using half your speed to move. So with that combo, you're now 15 feet away from them, and they have to use half their movement to stand up. So there's a very slim chance of them catching you, especially if you spend your next round using your action to dash and move, and then bonus action to dash again. That's just one of many examples I can come up with. Then at 14th level, you get the Devious Strikes ability, which gives you 3 more abilities you can choose: Daze, Knockout, and Obscure, and each of these costs significantly more, but by 14th level, you have 7 dice to work with. Now let's take a look at the Rogue subclasses. You have Arcane Trickster, Assassin, and Thief, which all replace the 2014 version, and then the Swashbuckler, which is an upgrade from the the Xanathar's version. And one thing that I think is really cool is each subclass gives you something different to do with those cunning strike dice. With the Arcane Trickster, you can use sneak attack dice to do extra things with your mage hand. The Assassin allows you to add extra poison damage. Thief gives you the Supreme Sneak ability that allows you to stay hidden even after you hit a target. For Swashbuckler, the Dashing Strikes ability gives you two options to either parry, subtracting 2d6 from your damage to add 1d6 to your armor class. The other option is Invigorate, which allows you to reduce your sneak attack damage in order to give a d6 to an ally that they can use on an attack roll or a saving throw. Again, this just increases the versatility of the rogue, and overall I really like this design. The rogue and the bard look really solid, and I'm hopeful about the ranger. So that wraps up our expert classes for the new version of Dungeons & Dragons. And it brings us to the halfway point of this video series. Make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you get notified as soon as the next video comes out, because we've got 2 more videos to go, Priests and the Mages. Thanks again for visiting the Dire Den. I'm Brad Wolf, and I'll see you next time.